Nagash is of course the ultimate personification of death. From vampires to tomb kings, no undead faction can resist his influence, and he sits at the very top of the undead totem pole for all eternity. The Legions of Nagash mod adds this legendary figure to the game, so let's see if he's any good. This video is brought to you by channel partner Instant Gaming. If you like both video games and saving money, then you'll probably want to check them out. They have thousands of games including all the latest releases at low prices, and you can find them anywhere else. If you want to pick up some games for cheap, then click the link below to check them out, or stick around till the end of the video to learn more. This mod adds 3 whole factions to the game, so let's kick things off with the main man himself. Nagash comes with a massive number of unique faction mechanics. First of all, his approach to settlements and places of death. Whilst the faction can take every settlement on the map if they want to, they only really make full use of certain capitals known as places of death. Here they can build their full suite of buildings to recruit their full military roster, enhance the province and faction with infrastructure, and of course keep them well defended. Regular capitals can only be built to tier 3 and come with a unique set of buildings. They can build some limited recruitment, but the far better option is to build special recruitment and advanced infrastructure buildings. Special recruitment doesn't offer any recruitment capabilities locally. However, they do increase your max capacity for various unit types, allowing you to have a lot more units in play at any one time. Advanced infrastructure works similarly to regular infrastructure, but offers much more powerful effects for the region and faction-wide. When all of this is combined with their strong global recruitment, this makes for a very powerful combination. In minor settlements, they are limited to a set of 4 infrastructure buildings unless a resource, landmark, or dock are present. These 4 generic buildings offer minor bonuses to replenishment, corruption, army aid, and income, with a dirt cheap price tag to match. While it may seem pointless to take these minor settlements from these effects alone, it's always worth it for the commandments to milk every last bit of value that you can. Just don't get too upset if a hostile faction comes knocking and stomps straight through your lands. That said, the basic garrisons could be worse, so you can't complain too much. The Return of Nagash is the faction's questline, and unlike base game victory conditions, this will actually take you quite a lot of work and effort to complete. It begins by tasking you with making your way to Nehekara and taking control of the Black Pyramid. Once this is done, you can click on the icon at the top of the screen to begin the Great Ritual. This will take Nagash off the map whilst he conducts the ritual and causes a huge number of armies to spawn around the Black Pyramid, who will attempt to take it to stop the ritual. You have to hold out for 5 turns, and upon completion you'll achieve the short victory, but the game is far from over. Now you also have an empowered Nagash with a massively improved horde capable of recruiting the entire roster, legendary items, supercharged stats, an improved skill tree, and the ability to teleport to nearby settlements without using up movement points. Your objective is now to complete the final step, which requires you to take each of the settlements in the Rituals tech tab, complete their research projects, defend them from any attacks, complete the beginning of the end, defend them all once again, and then complete the final step. Once this research project is complete, you'll achieve the long victory alongside vassalizing all remaining undead factions on the map and gain some huge buffs to pretty much everything to stomp on everyone left. Nagash's roster also pulls from all branches of undead, with units from the Vampire Coast and Counts and the Tomb Kings. Their method of recruitment is just as much a mix of these factions. They pay no recruitment cost for anything but do pay upkeep, meaning you can recruit anything you want as long as you're willing to wait, but the cost will catch up with you if you're not careful. Most of their more elite units also work in a capacity system where you can only field so many of them at one time, meaning you'll need to continue to upgrade your recruitment and capacity to make use of late game units. You also work on an army capacity system, and this can be increased for research and buildings. You also have the Mortax mechanic. These are a collection of undead lords you must assemble to enact Nagash's Great Ritual. This is done by completing research projects unlocked after progressing through their quest lines. Once complete, these will cause the relevant lords to appear on the map under your control. They don't come with any territory like a normal confederation, and instead just join your faction as a lord and abandon all their territory, making them fairly easy to manage. All Mortax also have access to horde building, which allows them to recruit various units depending on their lord and home faction. None of them can get the full roster, so buildings are still necessary for most recruitments and of course capacity. Faction can also gather warpstone. It is gathered from mines spread throughout the world and is used to enact rites and rituals. His rites allow him to massively decrease unit upkeep, increase recruit rank and spawn emergency armies, increase replenishment, corruption and income, empower various army abilities, increase his army capacity, and make his provinces much harder to take. It can also be used to vassalize certain undead factions by force through Nagash's will. The factions seem to be anyone undead who isn't involved in your questline or a Mortag, so it's a good way to build up your network even further. On top of all this, the faction also makes use of vampiric corruption and raising the dead, but these are base game mechanics, so I'm not going to explain them again here. And lastly, Nagash comes with his own unique set of commandments. Master of Puppets is an excellent song and is also really great when doing battle in that province, particularly during those endgame rituals. Soul Harvest is mainly useful for the extra income, but extra magic never hurt anyone. Tempest of Death is strong for recruitment as well as speeding your armies through your territory without much risk of vigor loss reduction, even on forced march. And Chains of Life is a bit strange but can allow you to stack a ton of radiant income at the cost of making everyone who's not undead hate you more than they already do. Next up we have the Lahmian Sisterhood. She's a vampire count's lord, so takes their base mechanics like corruption, raised dead and bloodlines, but also brings something of her own. She steals seduction and cults from Nakari, but it brings a vampiric coat of paint. Just like Nakari, she can build up her influence on human, elf, dwarf and ogre factions to make them much weaker to her charms before dominating them for instant vassalization. Influence is built up by battling and interacting with the faction in diplomacy, spreading vampiric corruption to their lands, giving them Neferata's Kiss by targeting their lords with hero actions and cult buildings. She can spend blood kisses to proliferate cults to spawn them in 3 settlements across the map. In these cults, she has the choice of 3 buildings to spread corruption and increase influence, allow replenishment for your armies and buff vassals. Which you should build really depends on the location. Increasing influence will almost always be the right choice to put more factions under your spell, but if they're already your ally, then the vassal buffs are a good option, or rebel army if you just want to screw over the owner. This action costing a blood kiss makes it pretty costly, so make sure you make the most of every single cult that you can. She also can make use of pre-battle seduction to steal units from the hostile army in exchange for gold to have them on side for the duration of the battle. Like I said, it's basically the Nakari mechanics, but works very well for the vampire counts and is alongside their other mechanics, so it makes it feel a little bit more special. Plus, her unique twist is faction levies. Every faction you vassalize has a chance to provide levies per turn, and all these are instantly recruitable units from their faction. This means you can get access to all kinds of units that no vampire ever can, like Swordmasters of Hoeth, Celestial Dragon crossbows, and even the Dreadquake mortar. Neferata also has a chance to gain some of these levies post-battle if she beats the relevant faction. And finally, we have the Wailing Conclave. These also have all the base game vampire mechanics and steals hexes from Mama Stanky. All hexes cost spirit essence, and this is mainly earned through battling alongside spreading vampiric corruption to as many regions as possible, alongside a handful of other less reliable methods. It can then be spent on each of these 6 hexes, but they have to be unlocked first. The first one is unlocked when you have enough essence to use it, but the rest must be unlocked by spending essence on hexes and unit upgrades. The hexes are useful for instantly flooding own settlements with vampiric corruption, slowing down hostile armies in your lands, teleporting your armies around the map, stealing income from enemy settlements, causing chaos with disposable armies in enemy lands, and totally decimating most areas of an enemy faction. While some are a little bit niche, I actually found myself using most of them as often as I could and not just to grind out to the higher tiers. Once unlocked, each hex can also be upgraded through research to further increase their power, and these are well worth the investment if you can afford them. She also has the ability to upgrade all ethereal units in her faction to give them more spell or physical resistance to help them stand up to different forms of damage a little bit better. Honestly, ethereal units are always a little bit hit and miss, and this hardly helps, but it's something else to spend essence on, so we can't complain. This is the fastest way to spend essence to unlock those later game hexes, so it's a great option if you want to rush through and also lean into the ethereal gimmick. We also have a number of new units coming with this mod. First up, we of course have Nagash himself. In his weakened form, he's a powerful spellcaster, but not much else. His melee stats and damage are fairly low, meaning he'll want to stick to the back lines until he can ascend. His spells are from the Law of Undeath, a totally unique law to him full of damage, summons, and healing. Once he reaches his supreme Lord of Undeath form, he carries over all of that spell power, but now also has an immense amount of compatibility. All of his stats are supercharged, making him devastating in melee against pretty much anything. He does become a much larger target for enemy ranged units, but with power like this, they won't stay out of his reach for long. He really does feel like a Lord of all Undead and is a blast to play with. Neferata is another strong vampire lord with a mix of the laws of vampires and shadows. Alongside spellcasting, she's also an expert in melee with very high melee stats and armor piercing damage. She's very tough and will deal a lot of damage, making her good at basically everything outside of ranged. For mounts, she has a Barded Nightmare and Nagadron the Adavor. This is a new mount type added with the mod that some of the other Mortags can pick up. They're fast, flying beasts and allow Neferata to be a more deadly melee fighter wherever she likes. Pledra is the one and only ranged vampire lord. Her damage is pretty respectable and the medium range explosive shots make her great versus single targets or clumps of infantry. She's also pretty strong in melee with a focus on attack, relying on her etherealness to stay alive. Krell is also added as a proper lord as part of the Mortags mechanic from Nagash and is a little bit stronger than regular hero summonable Krell. Manfred gains a new mount, Ashigaroth Gorger upon the Meek. This is a new mount he gains when he joins at Nagash's faction. It gives him a massive boost to speed and damage, enhancing his already stacked resume with even more value. Arkan also gains Razarak, the Doom of Traitors, which works much the same as Manfred's new mount, but is just a little bit weaker overall. Moving on to the heroes, we have Genevieve Dudon. Guys, I didn't pass French. She's honestly a lot more useful on the campaign map with various skills and abilities to keep her busy. In combat, she's a decent melee fighter with non-armor piercing damage and toughness, meaning she doesn't really have much to do once you hit the late game. And eventually, she can pick up a barded warhorse mount. The Mortghast Archai is a new generic hero type, and they're huge flying monsters with massive damage. With high melee stats, armor piercing, and anti-large, they make for great duelists with larger or mounted lords, but can also do well in regular front lines. The only real issue is the larger size, making them easy to focus from a range. Moving on to the melee infantry, first up Skeleton Reapers. These are essentially great weapons skeleton warriors. Heavy focus on attack with very low defense but some armor piercing anti-infantry damage. They can do well, but they'll take a lot of damage while they're at it, so use a lot of caution. The Spirit Hosts offer some earlier ethereal units with their resistance will carry them a lot further. Their actual damage use outside of being nearly immune to all normal damage is pretty minimal with low attack and damage. They can be great support infantry, but are a little bit tricky to get massive value with. Fel Spectres are a smaller group of beefed up spirit hosts with a lot more attack and damage to bring them up in usefulness. They also come with abilities to make them unspottable and much more effective in combat, so are a real step up, and provided you're not against a lot of magical damage, can really bring in the value. The Nagash Guard are the best of both worlds between the Tomb and Graveguard. They're very tanky with high defense and armor, but also deal some decent non-armor piercing damage to other infantry. They'll be a great late game frontline with their general resistance to everything. The Halberds Nagash Guard swap some defense for more attack and that armor piercing anti-large, making them a much bigger threat in melee, especially against larger targets. Moving over to the cavalry, first up we have Carrion Riders, and these are another earlier game ethereal unit. They are ludicrously fast flyers with pretty respectable stats across the board. Not the toughest against magic, but as long as they avoid that, then they should be fine and deal some decent damage to anything that won't directly counter them. The Nagash Knights are another endgame shock cav with a huge charge bonus and speed alongside armor piercing damage. Like most shock cav, their melee stats are pretty poor, so they will need a lot of micro, but if you can handle it, they're probably the best at this job in the undead ranks. The undead chariots are very similar to these skeleton arch chariots, but with less ammo and range, but more charge bonus. They can be used pretty much the same to charge around and fire at will, for a bit of both. Coming out to the monsters, first up Sandcrawlers, and these are essentially less fleshy Mongols. They're a downgrade in most stats but are unlocked a lot earlier, so it's hardly an issue. They're decent early to mid-game flankers to take out backlines or enemy flankers with their anti-large bonus. They do have pretty awful defense, so as long as they're fighting targets that can't really fight back, they should be fine. Glowing Ghouls are even slower, but are improvements nearly across the board, making them great at these same sorts of jobs. Add on the magical damage, and while they're not going to beat anything super threatening, they should have no problem with whatever the backlines can throw at them. Bone Golems will fill the same role as Crypt Horrors as frontlines monsters, but drop the armor piercing for bones versus large and much more defense. These are some seriously tanky monsters, so can work great alongside a more damaging infantry unit to take on enemy front lines. Either that or taking on less armored infantry to make the most of that bonus. And Mortghasts, these are basically smaller versions of the hero, so do most of the same jobs, but a little bit differently. They drop the anti-large, so just fast, devastating monsters with great all-around stats, allowing them to take on basically anything. As long as they don't get surrounded or focus fired, they'll have a pretty great time. And lastly, we have a new artillery unit, the Bone Thrower. This is a decent ballista artillery with long range and high armor piercing anti-large damage. Like all ballistas, it can struggle to land clean shots, but if it does, the damage is very respectable and is great for softening up large targets like single entity monsters. It won't carry you through the game like some artillery pieces, but it's something fun for the early game, so does its job well enough. We also have new regiments of renown. Burning Dead are Nehekara warriors. The Revenants of Morkane are Great Weapons Graveguard. The Shade Haunts are Fel Spectres. The Throne Guard are Nagashizar Guard. The Doomed Legion are Khorne Chaos Warriors. The Doom Riders are Nagashizar Knights. The Blood Beasts are Vargulfs. Drewthor, the King of Grimbarrow, is a Death Shriek Terrorgeist. The Bone Colossus is a Rogue Idol. And Virion the Grim is a Corpse Cart. Now some closing thoughts on the mod. This is one of the most complete mods I've played since I've started covering them. Nagash and his faction just flat out feel like a DLC lord with just how deep their mechanics are and how well he fits into the world alongside other factions. His questline is very challenging and will take you a huge number of turns to get done, and the rewards for completing it are well worth the effort and a lot of fun to play if you feel like doing more. The other two factions are still good additions, and I'll never be mad at more vampire counts, but they're nowhere near as deep as Nagash and are essentially stealing mechanics from other factions, so they don't offer anything totally new. That said, all three factions are a lot of fun and well worth playing for any undead fan. New units are a smaller set of additions, but they do help round out the undead roster and help Nagash feel even more like a DLC lord. Having access to all the undead rosters is great fun, and mixing units from each branch is a great way to cover all your bases and have some great army variety. Overall, this is a truly fantastic mod that really everybody should try, but especially if you're into the undead side of things, there is a lot here to love. But that is everything I have on this Legions of Nagash mod. Let me know what you think of the mod in the comments below, alongside any other mods you'd like me to check out. Like the video if you did, subscribe for more, and become a member to see yourself in the credits. Thanks for watching if you made it this far, and thanks to channel partner Instant Gaming for sponsoring the video. Look folks, we all know that gaming is an expensive hobby. Sure, the barrier to entry can be pretty high, with consoles and PC components reaching some pretty nauseating prices in recent years, but even once you're in, it feels like the price for new games is rising all the time, making keeping up with the latest games into an extremely costly challenge. The Silent Hill 2 remake is at £60 on Steam. That's a full tank of petrol and a few days worth of groceries. And you see, that's where Instant Gaming comes in. They sell all the latest games for lower prices than you can find them anywhere else. Silent 2 is over 30% off, making it £40, which is a lot more enticing. Strategy games, which I, and statistically you, play more than anything else, are some of the worst culprits in terms of DLC, adding up to hundreds of pounds of content if you want the full experience. On Steam, if you want the full Immortal Empires experience, you need all 3 games, which are £40 each, and £230 of DLC, and an extra £3 if you want a Side of Blood. That's a grand total of nearly £350 for just one game. Well, on Instant Gaming, we can bring that down to less than a third of the price. I could go on all day comparing prices, or you could just check them out for yourself at the link below and start saving. Let's be honest with ourselves, we're probably going to buy far too many games anyway, so why not save some money while we're at it? Plus, if you shop using my link, it directly supports the channel, so we all win. Thanks to Instant Gaming for sponsoring the video and the channel, and thank you if you've watched all the way to the end. Have a great rest of your day, and I'll see you in the next one.